All right, so good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the New York City Latino Gay by Men's Health Rally. This is our second year and following the public health recommendations, guidelines for COVID-19 and social distancing. We are breaking our rally into two panel discussions. This is the second one. Buenas tardes a todos, todas y todes. Bienvenidos a la reunión de salud de latinos gay y bisexuales de la ciudad de Nueva York. Este es nuestro segundo año y siguiendo las recomendaciones de salud públicas y las pautas impuestas por COVID-19 y el distanciamiento social, estamos dividiendo nuestro rally en dos paneles de discusión y este es nuestro segundo y último panel. Un brief message in Spanish para aquellas personas que prefieran usar traducción de inglés a español. Lo pueden hacer a través de la línea telefónica que está en el chat. Y agradecemos hoy a Frank Hulka de Oasis Brooklyn, quien nos está asistiendo con estas traducciones. So, thank you so much to Frank Hulka from Oasis Brooklyn, who will be assisting us translating from English to Spanish with a sideline that is on the chat. We are ready to start. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Luciano Reverte, and I am the director of the Latino Gay by Men initiatives, a Latino Commission AIDS and Oasis Wellness Center. Also with me today, we have Julio Rolón Mendez, who is the manager of the Latino Gay by Men initiative, who will be moderating this panel discussion. So please, if you have specific questions about the presentation, type that down in the Q&A session that you have at the bottom of your screen if you are connecting through a computer. We encourage you to use the Q&A session for a specific question about the presentation. You can use the regular chat for comment and reactions, but it will be great if you can place your question for the presentation in the Q&A session. So we are taking more time to introduce today's topic and our wonderful group of panelists. So thank you so much for being here, all of you, friends and colleagues. I will pass the mic to Julio. Julio, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, so the screen is all yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Julio Arnaldo Rolón Mendez. I'm the program manager on Latino Commission AIDS. And for today's panel, I'm gonna present now the panelist. So let me see. Can you see the screen? Okay, so today we are going to talk about racism, colorism, machismo, and heteronormativity in Hispanic and Latinx communities. The panelists today will also touch upon how address these issues through diversity acceptance, and also talk about Black Lives Matters and the Hispanic and Latinx community and the importance of developing leadership to strengthen these communities for the healthcare future. So today, basically, we're going to talk about racism, colorism, gay by men health, Black Lives Matters movement, and classism. So to start, I'm going to present Manuel DIAZ-RAMIREZ. Since 2018, Manuel is the Director of Community Health Action at La Clínica del Pueblo, Inc. in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area, overseeing the La Clínica's gender and health promotion and sexual health and LGBTQ health promoters and health communication programs and strategies. Before immigrating to the US in 2005, Manuel worked as a community health center in Lima, Peru, to implement prevention and care services targeting male and sexual health programs for youth. Manuel graduated and licensed as a social psychologist and later studied public health. He has 27 years of professional experience in sexual and HIV prevention, gender and masculinities, and sexual diversity. Manuel received the 2018 Unidos US LGBTQ Champion Award by Unidos US in recognition of La Clínica as Unidos affiliate for exceptional leadership and commitment to the LGBTQ community thoughts through its programs and services. He also awarded the 2015 Community Leader Award by the Latino GLBT History Project, and during the 10th Annual Hispanic LGBTQ Heritage Award in September 2015 in Washington, D.C. So welcome, Manuel. Following, we have John Blasco. He is the LGBTQ plus liaison for New York City Council Speaker Corey Johnson. He started at the City Council in 2014, working for former Councilwoman Rosie Mendez, and then served Councilwoman Carlina Rivera in 2018. As the LGBTQ plus liaison for Speaker Johnson, John makes connections between many LGBTQ plus organizations and the policy work being done in the council. He also covers other areas of work that often overlaps with the LGBTQ plus community, such as criminal justice, public safety, and issues related to HIV and AIDS. Welcome, John. Now we are going to present Omar Martinez. He is an associate professor at Temple University School of Social Work. He also leads Temple Implementation Sciences Laboratory. His research integrates perspectives from public health, medicine, law, social work, and human sexuality to create interdisciplinary strategies to address health inequities. His experience include the design, implementation, and evaluation of program and intervention to address the health disparities affecting underserved population, including trans equity, research project, a peer-led group-based HIV prevention and care intervention for men and women and trans experience, Hombres, a best evidence community level intervention, HIV prevention intervention for heterosexual Latinx, and Connect Unite, a couple-based behavioral HIV prevention intervention for Black MSN, and Connecting Latinx in Parejas, a couple-based HIV prevention and care intervention for Latinx MSM. He is currently leading an NIH-funded study developing medical legal partnership comprehensive HIV care discussion model to improve HIV care continuum outcomes among people living with HIV. He's currently served as consultant in the HIV Intervention Science Training Program for underrepresented new investigators at Columbia University. Professor Martinez will present the social and structural diverse of COVID-19 pandemic among Latinx population and the outline at a set of recommendations and approaches to improve health and response to COVID-19 among Latinx. Welcome, Omar. And the last panelist is Miguel Angel Diaz-Martinez. He's a national community leader for people living with HIV. More specifically, he operates as a public health practitioner, organizational capacity builder, and language justice advocate. Driving by passion, improving health equity, his mission to remove structural barriers to healthcare access after a decade of working as a frontline community organization in the Mississippi Delta. His work centered on advocating for Black people of color living with HIV, LGBTQ plus youth, and Spanish-speaking immigrants in accessing culturally responsive care. Thus, laying the path of his advocacy in language justice, Miguel Angel's recent work consisted in adapting the National Building Leaders of Color blog on NMAC training to Spanish. As the former NMAC Advocacy Associate Manager of the Center to End the Epidemics, he implemented Blog en Español and contributed to the Rise Proud 2.0, ending the HIV epidemic, focused on group initiatives. So welcome, Miguel Ángel Díaz. So let me just stop the share. To begin today's discussion, I'm gonna give some definitions and some information about some studies made to the LGBTQ and Latino communities. And then I'm gonna ask a few of some of you some questions, or I'm gonna open the discussion. So to start, I want to define the terms of racism and colorism. Racism is the belief that someone's races are inherently superior physically, intellectually, or culturally to others, and therefore have a right to dominate them. In the United States, racism, particularly by whites against blacks, has created profound racial tension and conflict in virtually all American society aspects. Until the breakthrough, achieved by the civil rights movements in 1950 and the 1960s, white domination over blacks was institutionalized and supported in all branches and government levels by denying blacks their civil rights and opportunity to participate in political, economic, and social communities. Meanwhile, colorism is prejudice or discrimination, specifically with a racial or ethnic group favoring people with lighter skin over those with darker skin. So some studies have shown that microaggression have negative consequences in the mental health of the target. For example, Black males who experienced microaggressions reported physical distress, including anxiety, feelings of hopelessness, and fear. So I want to ask Miguel Ángel, what is the impact of racism and colorism specifically in Latinx gay by men's health?
Gracias, Julio. Wonderful question. And this is something that, you know, as someone who grew up in Texas and also lived in Louisiana for a long time, has confronted on the regular. When I immigrated to Texas, you know, being an Afro-Latino immigrant, there are different forms of discrimination that show up in different levels of education opportunities, also access to care, and also the availability of being able to progress economically due to the lack of language access. So one of the things that I've noticed throughout the years is that for the Latinx community, particularly in the HIV field, there lacks a significant amount of funding for specific programming that target Afro-Latinx and Latinx individuals, specifically in the South. And part of that is because much of the programming or funding opportunities sometimes are mixed with the African American population, or let's say a native Indian or an indigenous. And so I think it's important when we were thinking about you know, how we are ending the HIV epidemic to take into consideration how colorism really impacts the work that we're doing as minorities, right? There is such a thing as, you know, people being treated differently just because of our different skin tones. So it's important to talk about these issues, especially right now with the movement that's going on, so we can really address forms of discrimination in the healthcare system and on public health programs that are not reaching the population the way they should be.
Thank you, Miguel. And I want to also include in the discussion about Black Lives Matters. Now we are experiencing this movement that started on 2013, dedicated to fighting racism and anti-Black violence, specifically in police brutality. But according to some professionals like Arlene Davila, professor of anthropology and sociocultural analysis of New York University, and Barbara Abadia, research sociology professor of University of Puerto Rico, non-Black Latinos continue to believe that minorities themselves, they are incapable of racism. Some Latinos will argue that you can apply the same standards of racism because we have our humor and we are not racist because we are Latinos, and we can get away with that without getting regulated. So still the Hispanic media inhibits the clear preference of non-Black Latino for their narrative of colorism. This colorist norm can be damaging to Afro-Latino children. Specifically, they also hear racist language used by family and friends, like, for example, pelo malo or bad hair, mejorar la raza, or improve the race, or arreglar la raza, like fixing the race, is common admonishment as a way to encourage Latino kids to marry lighter skin or white person to have better looking kids. So there are people that don't want to use word Black because they think that is an insult. And there's still an idea that we need to better the race. So I want to ask John Blasco, how do Black Lives Matters has impacted the Latinx and gay by men's health and communities?
Thank you for the question, and thank you for the rally to the Latino Commission on AIDS. I was able to participate last year, and it was a really exciting first virtual one, but I think you're doing a great job already. So thank you, and thank you to all the other panelists for being here and sharing your wisdom. I think the first thing I will start off by saying is that no one is free until Black folks are free, right? We can talk about many different movements and how those movements, specifically LGBTQ plus movement, was impacted by the civil rights movement, and also how they integrated within each other. Just looking at many historic movements, figures, the Young Lords Party, the Black Panther Party, people like Sylvia Rivera, who was a trans Latina and also a member of the Young Lords Party fighting for civil rights in Puerto Rican people. So I just want to start off by saying that no one is free until Black people are free. And I think that this is a really particular time and I think conversation that people, especially gay and bi Latino men, need to be having about privilege, and not just privilege when it comes to your skin tone, but privilege as someone who might identify as male, privilege if you have, if you are able-bodied and you do not have a disability, right? This is a conversation that we just need to have. And it's also a tough conversation. It makes people feel uncomfortable. But I think that when folks can start talking about, like, when I can start sharing all the privileges I have and how that can help me exceed in ways that darker skinned folks cannot exceed, or Black folks cannot exceed, because of the institutional systems that are in place, then we can start having a conversation about what Black Lives Matter movement just means, right? In the past couple of months, my family, part of my family is from Puerto Rico, from Ponce, and I've seen just many of the folks on the island just standing up to the former governor, standing up to the current administration in Puerto Rico. And I've also seen them standing up to police violence, because police violence doesn't just exist in the United States, it exists internationally, but it may look very different in other parts of the country. But I was really proud to see like Afro-Latinos and Boricuas just come and do like Black Lives Matter movements and marches and rallies and protests against police violence on the island. And that was just really inspiring. Is an important conversation about just intersectionality. Like, I know that we're focusing on Latino, gay, and bi men, but you know, I think for any community, we need to start like dissecting the different parts of what makes us and who makes us who we are and what we are, in order to figure out how we move forward in the world, to the point where we all can be free and we all can be free people. So those are just some of my initial thoughts.
Yeah, and I just want to jump in really quick, building from these two previous questions and the impact of that. And you know, white supremacy, racism matters when it comes to health, right? And our research, right, here at Temple and the research of other scholars, I'm thinking about Scott Rhodes in North Carolina, Carlos Rodriguez Diaz now in Washington, D.C., Maria Isabel Fernandez in South Florida with Latinos, right? We have documented, right, how pervasive racism, white supremacy is, and the linkage between these forces and health outcomes. I just want to share with you really quick some data, right, to point this out and to highlight the significance of this. I think you guys are seeing this information. So this was a project we did with men and women of trans experience here in Philadelphia, predominantly Latinas and Afro-Latinas, as you can see. We actually capture, right, past experiences of discrimination, right? You were treated with less courtesy than others, right? You were are treated with less respect than others, right? People act as if they were afraid of you. But if you look at the type of discrimination, which one is the top, right? 31% based on race and ethnicity, right? So racism matters, right? White supremacy matters. And it disproportionately impacts Afro-Latinas and is pervasive, as this data shows, among men and women of trans experience here in Philadelphia and predominantly Afro-Latinas who joined part of the study. So just wanted to highlight that, right? We have documented quantitatively, qualitatively, the pervasiveness of the issue among Latinos and Latinas and how it's linked, right? How is this racism and white supremacy a determinant of health outcomes?
Thank you, Omar, for all that data and the information, because it's important also to include the trans community in the conversation. Because as John BLASCO said, it's about intersectionality, so multiple identities. So to talk about a little bit about what John BLASCO said, the privilege. I want to talk a little about the other types of discrimination that also affect the LGBT community, like classism. And classism is a differential treatment between worth based on social class or perceived class. It's a systematic alignment of characteristic of worth and ability based on social class. So, the commercialization of queer culture encourages classism within the LGBT communities, ensuring a better quality of life that excludes those of lower socioeconomic status. Consequently, many LGBT people will be pushed to work and live on non-LGBTQ spaces or safe spaces, facing discrimination among other economic and social challenges that make it difficult to live. What strategies, I want to ask Manuel DIAZ-RAMIREZ, what strategies can be implemented to solve this problem, but within the adult communities? Because most of the time we talk about education, and sometimes that includes the schools, but now within the adult community, what strategies can we implement to solve these issues?
Thank you, Julio. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm very happy to share the panel with my colleagues. Something that we have tried to do here at La Clínica is to open the space for dialogue. It's important for our organizations to start addressing, understanding much better how these systems of oppression are impacting our communities. And something that we believed it was an initial approach needed to be implemented within our staff members and our community participants was to recognize our own racial and class prejudice regarding how we understand our communities, how we understand race, how we understand poverty, how we learned since we were kids on these concepts, right? We needed to connect with our own stories, our personal history in terms of, for example, when was the first time we understood race, right? We had to connect those dots in our own histories to be able to connect to what is happening in our communities. So, for example, in my case, I'm the darker among 3 boys. My other 2 brothers, the 2 of them are blonde. So in my case, I was able to recollect when was the time that I was being aware of race, right? Those jokes made by kids in terms of, so you come from the lechero, and you are not, you know, our real sibling because you are darker than us, right? And those kind of jokes at the beginning, we don't connect, we are able to understand them, but later some of them, they make sense, right? And how then we are able to connect those experiences to what kind of model of service we are providing, how much we are aware of the model of services that we are designing to be conscious of what is our understanding of our community's health. Classism takes us to prejudice or assumptions on how the community behave. Like if we are talking about HIV and STI prevention or any other health intended outcome, why people are not using condoms, right? And how those conversations are impacted also through race, racism or classism. This cultura de la pobreza, right? This set of mind, this mindset of poverty, it doesn't exist. It's understanding how systemic structures are actually conditioning the services and the resources that the community have, right? For example, during this pandemic, we had to understand that we had to recognize that we were assuming that the community had access to technology and had access to internet or was able to stay at home. But we had to remember, we had to recognize that many of those essential workers working in restaurants, working in cleaning services, working in other jobs were not able to stay at home, and how that impacted their capacity to remain healthy and to protect themselves. How expensive were facial masks at the beginning of the pandemic, right? They were crazy expensive. Right now, those costs have lowered, but still at the beginning, we were shocked, for example, by the amount of staff members, our colleagues, who didn't have a housing environment that will allow them to work remotely, sufficient private, with enough privacy to serve clients remotely, or without the internet bandwidth necessary to conduct telehealth, for example. So those are conditions that our community faces that many times we we have to intentionally be aware of in order to design more effective services for our communities.
And I want, sorry if I can jump in, I do want to highlight that what Manuel just highlighted and stress that. I think that what La Clinica has done well, I'm thinking about TPAC here in Philadelphia, Galay in North Philly, is that they have become innovative frameworks, right, of care, right? Becoming innovative during the COVID-19 pandemic, highlighting La Clínica del Pueblo and their CVPR approach, community-based participatory research, right? Collaborating with folks at Hopkins, right? To make sure that they share with their clients the latest information about COVID-19, right? Models of care, right? For example, I know La Clinica is at the forefront of medical legal partnerships, right? Making sure that they address the health harming legal needs impacting their clients, right? So these innovative challenges, right? Like that we're coping, like the pandemic, the HIV epidemic has also pushed these agencies to be innovative, right? And to think about innovative models of care. Manuel also mentioned the mobile health and the e-health component. I'm also thinking about TPAC, right? And Dejalene Alvarez at TPAC, right? So TPAC here in Philadelphia serve predominantly people living with HIV. And as a result of the pandemic, they started working on a small food distribution services, serving Latinos here in North Philly, that's second and third generation Puerto Rican in Kensington. And now they have become a major food distribution across the cities, right? In South Philly, in West Philly. And they build from those community strength, right? So they have like around 200 volunteers just in North Philly, right? Distributing food. So I just want to highlight the power of community and our Latino community and Latina community, and the power of these collaborations, and highlighting the importance of these collaborations that are out there, right? That have come out as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, and a big shout out to those frontline workers at these agencies, at these community-based organizations serving our community.
Thanks, Omar, and thanks, Manuel. And I think it's really important to continue and make services accessible for all the communities, specifically make culturally sensitive services. And also, talking about culturally sensitive services, according to Sanchez and Greenberg, Liu and Bailen, they made a study that they said that we live in a society built on experiences of heterosexual majority. This is defined as heteronormative, relating or based in the attitude that heterosexuality is the only regular and natural expression of sexuality. So also Sumansky and Carr found that traditional masculine ideas affect how gay men felt about themselves and their sexual same-sex relationships. In a study of about 2,729 gay men's personal advertisement, Bailey found that gay men who choose gender-specific self-descriptors were significantly biased towards stereotypically masculine traits, for example, dominant, muscular, and athletic, and also labels as masculine man, straight acting, and jock. Furthermore, most advertisers explicitly request masculine mates, and they express that stereotypically feminine traits were undesirable in potential mate. So I want to ask you, Omar, what strategies can be implemented to solve the problem about machismo and the negative impact on the Latinx gay by men's health?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I'm pretty sure the other speakers can build on that, and we can have more of a discussion as a team. There's no doubt, right? Machismo and rigid gender norms impacts sexual and gender minority Latinos, right? Even when you look at top and bottom, right? These rigid sexual norms, even when and not, when to use or not use condoms, right? And how gender norms impact those behaviors. So there's no question about how pervasive it is and how it impacts our community. But I'm always thinking about this resilience framework, and I'm thinking about a particular intervention, Hola en Grupos, is for Latino, recently arrived monolingual Spanish-speaking Latino men. It was developed by Scott Rhodes and his team in North Carolina. Is a group delivery intervention that is building on resilience, adaptive behaviors, right? So we have is built on this positive reinforcement and resilience. And is a group, once again, is a group level intervention that usually occurs at homes, at local parties and engagements. So it's a great intervention that addresses some of these issues of a stigma that we haven't talked about yet, machismo and rigid gender norms. I'm also, a big shout out to our team here, Omar Valentin, the project director of our intervention called Connecting Latinos en Parejas. So it's a 4-session risk reduction, HIV risk reduction intervention for Latino male couples, right? For Latino men in same-sex relationship. And there's an activity, there's an exercise, it's called the Mi Casa exercise, where the couples, the dyad, walks with the interventionist and how people, how societies influence you positively and not so positively, right? And with the interventionist, with the peer, identify the strategies to address these not so positive behaviors. And once again, machismo and rigid gender norms comes a lot, right? These couples talk about how this forced gender norms impact their behaviors, impact their couples dyad relationship, impacts their communication, right? But once again, we're building from these resilient frameworks and psychosocial approaches like the Mi Casa exercise to understand that it exists, that machismo exists, but also to intervene and start challenging these gender norms. So those 2 examples come to mind of good interventions, right? Homegrown, community-led interventions that have been developed to address issues of machismo, gender norms, and how that translates to health and well-beings among Latino men.
If I may, I just wanted to add, we need to break down the binary system, right? Like, I have my pronouns on here, for example. My pronouns doesn't necessarily mean they don't necessarily match my gender identity, right? That can be very different from each other. But also just thinking about our city services. I work in local government. I work for the city council. I cover LGBTQ+ issues, and seeing some of the interactions that people, particularly like Latino communities or queer or trans or gender nonconforming communities have with institutions. If you go out to fill out a city form, it may be very gendered, that form, right? If you go through the Department of Education, they have a long way to go. And I think I talked about this actually at last year's Latino Commission on AIDS Health Institute. We were talking about homophobia and transphobia. And I was talking about when you are born and when you grow up, one of the first institutions you interact with is the Department of Education, and how that can be very gendered. And they've come such a long way in some cities and states, not all. But just looking at what services that local governments are allocating funding to, or the types of initiatives that elected officials might be putting their resources behind. I think we're pretty lucky in New York City to have, a speaker and members of the LGBT community and allies to just say we need funding in services that talk about LGBTQ curriculum, right? That you can see yourself reflected and not what like mainstream society is telling you you should be like or who you should be. I identify as a male, but I'm also very fluid with my gender, right? I've done drag before, right? And when you talk about what the traditional man is, like we really need to break that down. And we need to break it down too, to make room for other identities that I think that people don't always think exists, right? When you ask, I don't know, your traditional family or traditional Latino family, maybe, how many genders are there? They're like, there's man and there's woman, right? Like those are the two. There is no non-binary, there is no gender fluid, gender queer, etc. So we really need to start having those conversations. And also like in Latino communities too, what does our mainstream media look like and what are they telling families and communities? Have you ever seen a non-binary person in a novela? Like, I don't know, I'm not sure. You know, so those are the types of things. And, you know, even to bring it in just the US, right? The show Pose was just had, I think on personally me, had a huge impact, especially seeing some of the main characters in that show, their identities, seeing that the main character was Boricua, and like just all these different aspects of what it means, like what your identity means to you, and how that shows up in the world. And when you walk out in the street and when you go to school or when you go to your job, like all of that is so vital and important. I think we just need to break down the binary, and just like, if you know anyone's paying attention to what just happened this past weekend, right, in our federal government and what it means for the next administration. I saw this, I guess, a picture of all the vice presidents that we've ever had in the United States, and they were all white men, and they were all white heterosexual men, cisgender. And then you have this South Asian Black woman, fierce woman, who's about to be our next vice president. That says a lot, right? Like, we're in 2020 and it's all been white, heterosexual, cisgender men. So, yeah.
And adding to what Omar and John said, Julio, if I may, also for us has been important to open the dialogue among us, gay men, bi men, or non-binary men, in terms of what is the cost of these traditional masculinity stereotypes and norms to our own health, right? Why some men have more difficult to get tested every 3-6 months for HIV or other STIs? Why? What is the impact of these gender norms or gender stereotypes in our use of condoms or not? Understanding how these messages that we have learned since we were kids exposes us to more risk and a pattern of taking care or not taking care of our own health, right? How all these norms about men being able to, understanding that men can care, right? One can take care of ourselves, but also of others, impact our partner's health, our family's health, women's health, and how these messages have a cost in our own health. And this is crucial. This is crucial to our community's health.
Thank you, Manuel, for highlighting that. And just a brief snapshot, right? I think I mentioned the Connecting Latinos en Pareja, the couples-based intervention, and we started developing 3 years ago. We're now at the final stages. When we first started, I was coming from New York City. I finished my postdoc at Columbia, and I was thinking, now all the recruitment materials are going to be all these Latinos, shirtless, and right, sex sell, right? Like how to get Latinos to be part of the study. So I was buying myself and checking myself on the hypersexualization of our Black and brown bodies, right? I was feeding into that mindset, and I take responsibility for that. So when I took this idea to the community advisory board, they said, no, Marcito, take a step back, right? And really think about the message, right? What does it mean to have a shirtless Latino couple or Latino man out there, right, promoting health, right? You're contributing once again to the hypersexualization of the Black and brown bodies. So kudos to my CAB, to our Community Advisory Board. And this is the end product. I just want to share really quick, right? Everyone with shirts, right? Representing the diversity of what is a Latino male couple, right? Body shapes, sizes, right? Skin tone and colors, right? As we're family units. So thank you, Miguel, for highlighting that and how we become also part of this system and the importance of checking ourselves and challenging those systems. So thank you for that.
And to continue with the discussion in the last 10 minutes that we have of the panel, I want to ask you a few strategies that we can develop for the acceptance of diversity to create leadership in the community. So I think that as John said, it's important to break with the binary, and it's also important to educate about the diversity, so so we can develop more leadership and strengthen our community. So briefly, I want that you suggest us what could be implemented to create diversity and leadership among the Latino gay bi men. So I'm gonna mention the name and I'm gonna mention an area, and I want you to briefly give me a few hints or strategies that we can develop. For example, I want Manuel to give me strategies to develop leadership, but what we can do ourselves to develop strategies and acceptance diversity on our community.
So I will mention two, Julio. One, it will be as organizations to actively hire from the community, and the services that we provide have to be provided by people who look like the community, sound like the community, and connected and culturally and linguistically appropriate to the community we serve. And second, invest, assign resources, budgeting for training opportunities to our colleagues and community participants, but particularly training models that not only address knowledge, but also foster conversations connecting people's stories to what's happening in their communities. And to that conversation, add the information that they need to make proper decisions in their own programs and services within their own communities.
Thank you, Manuel. And I'm going to take two comments that are on the chat. Henry Peralta said, parents must be involved in this process of empowerment as well. And Alex Fontana said, yes, that's where the label starts at the family level. So I want to ask Omar, what strategies can we develop within the family to create acceptance of diversity and leadership on the Latino gay bi men community? You're muted, Omar.
Yeah, so that's a great question. Full disclosure, I'm not a psychologist or social worker or a mental health professional, right? So I'm just speaking about what I have seen, what has worked. For example, GALE has a grant. GALE is a non-for-profit organization here in Philadelphia that serves predominantly Latino and Latina LGBT populations. So they have a grant with DHS to work with LGBT self-identified Latino youth. So they actually go to the schools, right, and provide these charlas and talks about LGBT inclusiveness, right? But as part of that intervention package, they have what is called weekly focus groups or weekly meets, right? So the youth come with their parents. So the youth can actually bring their parents to those discussions, right? So with the moderator, right, that is a skills to address these issues, the parents become part of the discussion, right, with their youth. So that has seemed to work, right? Engaging parents on these issues with their youth and having a space, an appropriate space to facilitate that discussion, right? So I have seen that worked, right? So just wanted to highlight that model. But I'm pretty sure Miguel Angel, for example, can expand on this area, given his work.
Thank you, Omar. And I mean, I think, you know, you guys are really bringing in together many of the important things when you think about family importance and acceptance and how that impacts sexual health. I can tell you from the recent report that we've released, Tal Como Soy, Here As I Am, we discussed how family and community are essential to men's lives and identities, and both they provide a positive sense of being, and also find that, you know, you're able to find how networks of people get their their education on sexual health or HIV or testing. So it's very important, you know, to create programs that, you know, we're teaching the youth at a young age. That way they can be empowered not only to make the decision to get tested, use all the prevention tools, but also just like being able to talk about gender identity and understanding how machismo impacts people from even going to an HIV clinic, right? Because it's HIV is seen in the Latinx community as a gay disease or something that, you know, that you only acquire if you're a gay or bisexual male, which is false. And so I think it's important, you know, to have more dialogue about these things. And, you know, especially right now with the COVID-19 and all the increased barriers that this is putting for a lot of people to get into care, it's very important that, you know, we think about how the anti-immigrant rhetoric also impacts people from even discussing HIV care or, you know, staying in care. So all of these things, even though they're all in different realms, they're all interrelated to, you know, us as Latino or Latina, Latinx men being able to accept ourselves, get in care, you know, get the proper education so we can empower our community. And that's really where it starts. And I'll go ahead and give a shout out to a dear friend, Luis Fonseca. He has Gran Varones, where, you know, they talk about a lot of like family acceptance and, you know, personal experiences of queer, gay and bisexual men living with HIV, and, you know, really deconstructing the stigma. And that's really where we need to focus, is really, you know, deconstructing that stigma so families can be more supportive, and then we can eventually address the psychological impacts of, you know, being rejected. Thank you. And so, yeah, this is the Gran Varones, and he has many great stories, and he uses Black and Latinx queer, that people's stories about, you know, their experience growing up queer in the 90s and, you know, overcoming their HIV diagnosis. And it's a really beautiful way of normalizing, like you guys mentioned earlier, and also circumventing these issues and showing the resilience that we have. You know, we've gone through a lot of things just in this year, and, you know, we're seeing, you know, how people are tapping into that resilience.
Thank you, Omar, and thank you, Miguel, because I think that Miguel answered my next question. That was how we can develop acceptance and diversity through the community. So you give us like a lot of information on how we can develop that. So I'm going to jump then to John Blasco. What what the government can do to increase the acceptance of diversity and leadership in the Latino gay by men community?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think just going back to some of the things I was talking about before around initiatives, like no matter where you are, right? What are your city or state or municipal leaders investing in? Where are they allocating their funding? What do their legislative and policies look like? And how is that then impacting neighborhoods and districts and communities and specific populations is such an important thing to try to figure out. And, you know, and seeing yourself reflected in government is also very important too. So making sure that you are, you know, as involved as you are in federal level and what's happening in this past election, you're also involved in the very local level. Like who is your representative in your neighborhood is also crucial, because I think sometimes we look back as Latino communities, right? We might, or even as queer people or gay or bi, trans, we look back and we say, where's the representation? Where are we in this government body? And sometimes we just need to put ourselves out there and we just need to be in those government bodies and we need to be in those positions of power. So that's the other thing I would just say is making sure that we are civically engaged, not just during election times, but knowing that when there's not an election going on, that we need to be as involved in the very local issues. You know, here in New York City in particular, this past June, we had elections of so many seats, but also people don't know we had elections of judges, judges that were running for Supreme Court. And many people don't know that you can go out and vote for a judge, right? So when we think about the policies and like the legislative impact that's happening, especially on Latino communities and LGBTQ communities, that is one way things are going under the radar without people knowing it's going. And it's just so crucial to be involved in that, being involved in your local community board, and making sure that your community board reflects the people that live in the neighborhood as well. I believe that nothing can be done for a community without that community being at the forefront of the issue. And that's what we need. We need like Latino, LGBTQ folks at the forefront of issues in order to say, this is what we need to do. This is what we need to do next, because we know our community best. No one else can tell me as a queer Latino what the issues and priorities are for queer Latinos. I can tell you that. And we need to be investing in that in every single level, from the youngest person who sometimes you may be told, for anyone watching this, I know Latino Commission on AIDS has a lot of young membership as well. And oftentimes I remember being a young, or I think I'm still young, but I remember being a young organizer and being told, you're too young, right? You have not experienced this. You don't have the wisdom. That is not true, right? Mm-hmm. We should be moving in the world based off of the experiences that we are having, as I said before, on the streets, in the workplace, in schools, in our interactions. Like, you know yourself best, you know your community best, and we just need to invest in ourselves.
Thank you, John. And sorry, who was gonna speak?
I just said I really love what John said, because it's like he mentioned, it's like reinvesting into community, and that means having leadership in organizations look into how we're supporting Latinx young leaders who are entering the leadership spaces. So it's very important, you know, specifically like understanding that like many immigrants come into the U.S. and like are trying to learn how to work this system to move up. And so, you know, it's been created, you know, like we mentioned earlier, for mainly white heterosexual men. And so like, how can we, you know, work together as community and build, like John mentioned? I just wanted to add to that.
Yeah, and building on that, and John, you have said a lot of beautiful things. I couldn't even articulate it that way, but throughout your points, you mentioned inclusiveness, right, and intersectionality, and you, it's like a bingo. Yes, we do need more of that in everything we do, even here, right? I love the work of Latino Commission on Aid, but why? Right? Wouldn't it have been great to have a trans Latino, a self-identified trans Latino man part of this discussion, right? So we're thinking, we're being critical, right? And we're thinking about intersectionality, we're thinking about inclusiveness, and that will have added flavor to this discussion, right? Having a trans Latino man, right, from Kensington, right? Like, so to bring up that point, the importance of inclusiveness and intersectionalities for policy change and for action.
Thank you everyone for all your comments and the information. And I think that me as a, I've been working in different committees as a volunteer. I think that I never received any formal training about how to do advocacy, how to do get involved. And sometimes, as John said, when I started, I was really young. I'm still young, but I was younger. But I didn't have the experience, so I need to learn by doing all the stuff. Sometimes committing a lot of mistakes, sometimes being too passionate, and sometimes like reinvented the wheel. So I think that something that we need is mentors. And that is something that I also think that there is a lot of competence also between the leaders in the community, and some of them don't. It's like American Horror Story when a new Supremes start emerging. So I think that is something that it needs to have a better discussion. So I want to ask to all of you, what could community-based organizations could do or support these strategies that we've been talking about?
I mean, I think that this is one step, right? Like there's so many things that folks could be doing, advocates and community-based groups, especially when groups have large followings. And they have large memberships or clients or members just in general. I think it's great to hold conversations like this and being able to hold the tough conversation, right? I will say that as someone who, you know, and you all probably can speak to this too, just even before government being in nonprofit world, it's also very, it can be very challenging and very difficult. You enter that nonprofit industrial complex, and nonprofits and community-based organizations are like, we're on deadline, right? We have to meet these benchmarks. We want to get funded. We need to make sure we achieve these goals, and that the funder, we're a grantee, that the funder sees that we're doing X, Y, and Z. And sometimes that can shift away from having the tough conversations within your own organizations. But I think making sure that you're having time and moment for folks to, you know, practice self-care, and to have strategic planning, and to talk about, you know, giving, receiving feedback in ways that, you know, maybe someone has not done before. Julio, what you said just a moment ago, just about like you weren't trained in advocacy, right? You just had to jump in it. Many of us probably just jumped in it. And we jumped in it for specific reasons, different reasons. I jumped into the work I jumped into because I was like, this is, pardon my French, fucked up what's happening to my people. And I want to do something about it, whether it was on the community-based organization or the government level. So I think it's not an easy conversation, but I think because one example right here, the Latino Commission on AIDS is engaging in it, you're only helping the process, right? You're not hurting. And then each time you do this type of conversation, that you're going back and saying, what could we do better the next time? Can we, what other voices can we bring into this discussion that maybe we're not here right now?
Yeah, I'm just gonna expand on that a little bit. You know, what can this community-based organization do better? And I think we need to do better highlighting what works, right? These homegrown programs that work. For example, Jorian Veintidos, his staff at Galay, just developed an online network for young Latinos living with HIV and Latinas, right? But he hasn't been able to publish it, for example, right? So we need to do better highlighting these models of care and these support systems that work, right? And whether it's investing in those CBOs, right? Funding those programs, funding evaluators, right? Not only implementers, but actually people that evaluate and can disseminate these programs. I think that is a way to go. Highlighting these models of care by Latinas and Latinos that have been developed and evaluated, keep pushing this framework. I just want to highlight Chavez framework of healing ethno-racial trauma, right? It's a clinical framework, for example, on how to work with Latino and Latina immigrants, looking at community, looking at individual, looking at family units, and focusing on 4 things, right? Acknowledging, for example, that immigration status is a determinant of health, right? Thinking about racism, right? When working with Latino families and Latina families, thinking about skin color and racism. Also building of what it means to be a Latinx in this country, as well as additional forms of othering. So these 4 constructs as part of the framework. So once again, we need to do better. This was just published, by the way, by Chavez Dueñas. So we need to do better highlighting what works and what is out there, right, as a community.
Can I just say, I love that you're coming through with all these PowerPoint photos. You are fierce, okay? I just want you to know that.
I'm trying here.
So anyone and any other different panelists have another comments about that? Yeah, Miguel.
Sorry, Miguel.
Sorry, Manuel.
Okay. No, just from a financial perspective, because it's true, right? Many times we face restriction in the way we implement or we allocate funding to different proposals. So something that organizations do is trying to diversify their funding sources. Donations and unrestricted funding will allow us to do more health equity initiatives, to design and implement more health equity initiatives or advocacy efforts in our communities. Efforts that many times federal or local grants won't allow us to put in the work plan. But this unrestricted funding will help us to do that. And many times federal funding or local funding won't support research, to allocate money to research, as Omar pointed out, but having partnership with universities and academic communities will help us to maybe gather specific resources to produce knowledge, because we are all aware that, for example, CDC-based interventions are not developed by or for Latinx communities. And that's a huge gap in terms of interventions that are being implemented in the community. So budgeting, if we have a voice or a say on how we distribute those funds or what are the funding sources that we apply for, let's keep that in mind.
Thank you. And I think that that's really important, because some of the organizations don't have the funds, and we know that we need funding to do a lot of the work. not all the work is like for free or volunteer, because also volunteers need materials, need the space. So, and that's something that sometimes because of the lack of funding, we are not able to do all the things that we want to do. So right now I want to jump into the questions made by the community members. So thank you to all the panelists for all the information. And Omar, John, Manuel, and Miguel, thank you for your time. And so now I don't know who can answer this, but I'm gonna read the whole question. So it's a question made by Aaron Terry. Um, um, it said, what about LGBTQAPK Latino seniors who don't choose to go into the closet and are aging solos and look it at for social community outreach, or all other LGBT community members as well housing that is either sorry, it's too much letters, to the LGBTQ seniors as well, and as welcoming or gay friendly, since many may not qualify for services. How do we connect and provide support regardless of income? With these LGBTQ Latino seniors, as we are the fact that they are still pioneers in the general senior communities. What do we do to prevent social isolation, depression, and other mental barriers? It's a really long question.
I mean, I will say also that COVID-19 has exacerbated any isolation that folks have been through, right? Particularly for seniors. And folks were talking about this earlier. I'm sorry, it may have been Omar who mentioned it, but just recovery work, right? That's happening during COVID-19 and this pandemic. In my community, I live in the Lower East Side in Manhattan, which is predominantly, depending on the part of the Lower East Side, Black and brown communities, heavily Puerto Rican, immigrants. And we had to do a lot of, and just all council members across the districts, including the speaker, have had to do a lot of food distribution events to folks who were in need of food. They could not leave their homes because they were high risk for COVID-19. They had other underlying health conditions, a lot of Spanish-speaking communities and older folks. And COVID-19 has just exacerbated whatever was going on prior to that. In the city council, as one example, and government is only one part. There's many different factors to this, but in New York City, we've been able to work in specific districts with other partners providing housing, and housing that's inclusive and safe for like LGBTQ folks. In particular, in Fort Greene, Brooklyn, there's SAGE, one of the premier LGBTQ organizations for elders and seniors, did a lot of work in partnership with getting housing with NYCHA developments, NYCHA being the New York City Housing Authority, public housing. And they were able to do that and bring folks who live in the neighborhood and some of their members to apply for housing and get like social services for them, and at the same time, just support there. And that has been really instrumental, and just seeing like the amount of programs that groups like them, and even Griot Circle, who's also in Brooklyn, that's for LGBTQ seniors of color, has also been really important, because we also know, going back to race, right? Someone's experience as a senior, a person of color is very different from a senior who is white. So that is just seeing the difference there. Race ties into it all. Identities tie into it all. That's just one thing we've been able to do, is making sure that there are spaces designated for folks to feel comfortable and to see other community members who identify just as they do. And just going back into the intersection piece, I think the intergenerational piece is also important. again, Julio, you said before, you jumped into this without having advocacy experience, but mentorship is crucial, right? I get so much joy when I am able to talk to someone who's queer or trans, and they've been in the movement for X number of years. Maybe they experienced the 1969 Stonewall Rebellion, and like just hearing those stories about what they've been through, what worked, what didn't work, is inspiring to me and can help then, can help today's movement. So I think that the intergenerational work is so crucial too. And Latino Commission on AIDS does a really good job at bringing folks together no matter what your age is. And we need more services like that. But we also need to be patient, right? Because today, the 2020 Latino experience is very different from the 1969 Latino experience, right? So patience is crucial.
Thank you, John. And I have another question. Sorry, Omar?
Yeah, no, I do want to expand on that because that question is on point, right?
Yeah.
Not all Latino LGBT folks are in New York in this safety net networks, right? And accessing that, and it's a real challenge, right? And I always go back to this quote from one of our older Latino LGBT participants, right? Going to the nursing home is like going back to the closet, right? So you live your entire life, right, as an out LGBT Latino, and that experience, right, it's like going back to the nursing, to the closet, right? And that quote and that qualitative voice never gets away from me, and it's a real challenge that is important to acknowledge, right? And we need to come up with frameworks of care that are inclusive, like John mentioned a few of them, but mobile technology, peer navigators, right? We need to be thinking innovatively to address that real challenge, right? Impacting our older LGBT Latino folks.
Sorry.
Thank you, Omar. Yeah.
And how are our spaces accessible, right? Going back to the language access, but also to the disability piece, right? Oftentimes, disabilities are left out of the conversation, and that's important.
And also
specifically in New York, that we have too much stairs for the train, and to the mobility of to get to the services.
And also.
Sorry, I was just going to say that the council did a big push too, and obviously this is under the state, but the council did a big push in making sure that the MTA is working at subway stations, making sure that they're all accessible. And that was something that the state and the city were going back and forth on, but it looks like we're going to get to that.
Yeah, and I wanted to say also it's important to highlight the housing protections for tenants, right? How many LGBTQ plus members of our communities are evicted only because they look different, or only because they are transgender community members, or because they are too feminine, or they are whatever reason, right? Whatever reason is hidden behind the actions taken to evict them. So also we need those protections that are can be put in place by our advocacy efforts in government spaces.
Thank you. And the next question is, let me see, Max Sepulveda asks, do you believe that the work addressing gender identity as such should start with family cycles or society at large? Miguel?
I think it should it should be a approach that is really specific to different community. But I think for us it really starts with family, and when you start to have the conversation with mother and your cousins, and being able to have like some curriculum. I'm gonna go ahead and name Black Español, which is a leadership program for people living with HIV that was translated into Spanish, and it goes into talking about intersectionality. It talks about how we can wear multiple hats and like also work on, you know, advocating for community and educating our community members through different approaches. So I think it, you know, to kind of reflect back on that question, it really has to focus on the needs of the community and doing a needs assessment of how they would want that information, and, you know, doing capacity building as a to whatever the needs are.
And it's not always possible, right? Like sometimes the hard reality is that sometimes when you try to have tough conversations with your family, it doesn't always go well. And in New York City, over 40%, that this statistic has stayed the same for so many years. Over 40% of homeless young people are LGBTQ+, right? Like that is something that I heard in 2008, and in 2020, it's still the same statistic. And that's challenging. And for many people, they create their families, and that's also important in having tough conversations with your chosen family too, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's even harder when you see in the media or in all those cultural symbols that are stereotyping you because of your gender or your race or your sex orientation or gender identity. All the movies, they highlight lighter skin persons instead of darker skin, right? And this stereotype of darker equals bad or wrong, and lighter means good, perfect, saint, right? Even religion as well. Even Jesus was a Middle Eastern guy. He's painted as a white guy, almost blonde. So this it is hard to not forget all the structural systemic messages that are impacting our life since we are born.
And religion plays a big role in our system, right?
Yeah.
Specifically in Latino communities.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the challenge is how we partner with those community-based organizations that are inclusive, that understand our struggles, and actually are supportive and great partners to our causes. So the vast majority probably are not, but we need to find those allies. Who are those that are actually inclusive and supportive and actually understands how these systems work?
Yeah, I have another question from Jonathan Mateus. The question is, what are the main challenges for the Latino, gay, bisexual, queer community to access social services, health, education, and housing, and respect their human rights in general without the connection being challenged for HIV or AIDS?
Well, definitely say, you know, in the United States, having grown up in the South, language justice is one of the key barriers to social services, and people being able to have access to, you know, knowledge about PrEP, knowledge about PEP, knowledge about all the prevention services, and that really, you know, education is power, and people can make decisions on about their health if they have that. So I think, you know, really focusing, you know, with the ending the HIV epidemic, focus on language justice, and also having sustainable development of community organized or community frontline workers, right, that are working with the community at large. And being able to support them, because we talk a lot about like the social services and disparities, but we don't really talk about how frontline workers, you know, are burnt out, or they fall out of organizations. And these are great role models for our community, which ends up, creating more disparities because we have to start over and train somebody new. So, being able to have like some sustainable support for like people who are coming in is a really important part. So I'm going to pass it to my friends, and you guys can add.
Gentrification is also another venue that we need to understand how it's impacting our communities. How low-income or racial minorities communities are being pushed away from cities, which are becoming more expensive to live in. But also at the same time, we hear the current president to spread hate among people living in the suburbs, addressing the fears of minorities, immigrant communities moving into the suburbs, right? Because they cannot afford living in downtown or in the main city. And how this is impacting their health in general, not only related to HIV and STI prevention, but also, for example, food security, right? How these neighbors are designed in a way that only fast food resources are available and less farmers markets are available in those jurisdictions where other neighborhoods or community areas have the luxury to have plenty of these healthy resources available, and how that is impacting and conditioning other health issues like diabetes or obesity or lack of, for example, lack of sufficient parks or recreation areas where people can practice healthy lifestyles. So this is also something to take in consideration.
Yeah, and I know that we are having a great discussion here, but our time is up for the panel, and we still have 4 more questions, but I will send them through email to the panelists, so then we can share it in the main email that we're going to send later to thanks everybody to attend this webinar. So I want to thank you, all of you, for taking your time for this discussion. And I know that there are a lot of topics that intersect with each other and are we just really discussing in a broad way, but I think that it's important to have the discussion and at least start the discussion, because I know that we're not gonna end or solve the situation here, but at least we address it and give a little bit more information to the community. So thank you, Omar Martinez, thank you, John Blasco, thank you, Manuel Diaz, and thank you, Miguel Angel Diaz, for having this time with us and taking from your time to participate with the Latino Commission on AIDS in this webinar. So I also want to thank you all the agencies that collaborate with us in the oh, sorry, can you hear me? Okay, I just share again the web page of the rally, so you can get into the rally to see the recordings, and also you can click on the different logos of the agencies, so you can know more about their services and the service that you can access. Some of them were discussed here, some of others are more broad to different kind of populations, but please go to the website. That is going to be available in the webpage and also the recordings after we finish this webinar. So I'm gonna then pass the mic to Luciano.
Thank you, Julio, and thank you, everyone. I don't have too much to add. Just that you will receive an evaluation, an email with a link for the evaluation for this panel. This is the second panel discussion, so we are concluding all New York City Latino Gay by Men's Health Rally 2020 virtually, as everything has gone during this last time. But thank you so much. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your question. Thank you for the panelists. We see you soon. Stay safe. Se me cuidan mucho y muchas gracias.
Saludos, suerte, pa'lante.
Thank you, everyone, and stay safe.
Bye, everyone.
Chao, adelante.
Bye.